Blood pooled on the hardwood, warm against my cheek, the metallic tang flooding my mouth. My shoulder hung limp, each breath slicing through me. In the doorway stood my sister Claire, arms crossed, expression unreadable, while Mason's heavy footsteps faded down the hall. She didn't kneel. She didn't call for help. Instead, she spoke in a voice so calm it might have been rehearsed. "You should have signed the papers, Emily." Then she turned and walked away. "I'm Captain Emily Carter, U.S. Army Medical Corps, 34 years old. I've treated soldiers in field hospitals under rocket fire. I've held pressure on torn arteries while helicopters roared overhead. I've watched men bleed out in desert dust without letting my voice waver. But nothing in my training prepared me for my own sister standing by while I was beaten in my own home." Her words cutting deeper than Mason's fists ever could. That night had been still, too still, until the pounding started. Not the polite knock of a family visit, but the relentless thud of someone who believed they had the right to force their way in. When the doorframe splintered, Mason's face appeared first, red with fury, sweat darkening his collar. Right behind him, half a step back, was Claire. She didn't meet my eyes. She was scanning the apartment, as if she were already erasing herself from the scene. I knew exactly why they'd come. A week earlier, they'd shown me a glossy brochure for a 100-acre horse ranch outside Austin. "It's our dream," Claire had said, like a child talking about running away with the circus. All they wanted was my signature as guarantor on the loan. A $1.2 million mortgage, more than twice my annual base pay. I had said no. Not angrily, not dismissively, just no. Because if their plan failed, I would be the one to lose my home, my career, my security clearance. Mason didn't see it that way. To him, I'd betrayed some unspoken family code. Loyalty meant sacrificing everything for them. He was on me before I could step back, slamming me into the wall hard enough to rattle the framed flag above my desk. My training urged me to stay calm, assess my injuries, look for an escape. My instincts screamed to fight back. But when I met Claire's eyes, searching for the sister I'd once shared hand-me-downs and secrets with, I found only a stranger. Her words still echo. "You should have signed the papers." As if a signature could erase what was happening. As if my refusal was the crime, and the bruises were just the punishment. I'd seen betrayal before, quiet, efficient, final, in combat zones. I never thought I'd face it in my own living room. Delivered by the one person I believed would always have my back. I wish I could say it came out of nowhere, that the violence was an unexpected storm. But the truth is, I'd been watching the clouds gather for years. First quietly, like the way a room feels before thunder breaks. Claire and I grew up in a house where uniforms were like second skin, and the smell of boot polish never faded. Our father was Army, our mother a nurse who followed him from base to base. Discipline and loyalty weren't suggestions, they were commands. I carried those values like armor. Claire wore them like an ill-fitting coat, easy to shrug off. By my first deployment, she'd already dropped out of college. "Just for now," she said, until she figured out her path. What followed was a string of short-lived jobs. Bartending, car sales, running a boutique for a few months before it folded. I sent postcards from the Middle East. She sent snapshots from music festivals. We were different, but I still thought we were close. Then Mason appeared. A former Marine, discharged after a knee injury. Charming on the surface, but I noticed the way his hand gripped Claire's arm a little too firmly when she laughed, how he'd subtly correct her mid-sentence. I'd seen control before. It rarely starts with shouting. It starts with shaping. A year later, I stood beside Claire as her maid of honor in a wedding that looked like a magazine spread. Live band, crystal centerpieces. Champagne you don't buy on a budget. Mason's landscaping business was barely breaking even. Claire wasn't working, and I knew they didn't have the savings for it. Soon the calls began. First for small amounts. Then more. "Just until the next contract comes through," Mason would say. I told myself this was what family did. But every yes cracked my armor a little more, letting the storm seep in. It was a Tuesday when they showed up again. Claire in a silk dress I'd never seen. Mason in a tailored suit far from his usual work boots. They brought a bottle of wine so expensive it could have had its own bodyguard. They acted like it was a social visit, but Mason's gaze kept drifting to the medals in the shadow box above my desk. Claire's smile was too bright, her laughter half a beat too quick. Then Mason pulled a glossy brochure from his leather briefcase. Rolling pastures, white-fenced arenas, a barn straight out of a film set. "This is our future," Claire said, tapping the page. Mason leaned in, voice low and certain. "With your record, the bank will approve it instantly. This could change everything." I didn't need to read the fine print. No steady income between them, a $1.2 million mortgage, and the kind of optimism that burns through cash like fire through dry grass. I told them I'd think about it. That bought me exactly one day before Mason's texts began. The following morning, I stepped into Lieutenant Colonel Miller's office on base. He'd been my mentor since my first deployment. A man who could read a financial report as easily as a battlefield map. He glanced through the brochure, his jaw setting hard. "Absolutely not," he said. "If you sign this, you're tying both your career and your clearance to a financial disaster waiting to happen. Don't let family drag you into a hole you won't climb out of." That weekend, I gave Claire and Mason my answer. The air in my living room shifted instantly. Claire's smile flickered, while Mason's sharpened, like he'd just added me to some invisible list. He didn't speak, only set his glass down slowly, so it rang against the table's surface. But his steady, measuring look felt like a promise. The kind meant to be collected, not kept. Mason didn't bother pretending my refusal was final. The messages began that night. Long tirades about loyalty, about what family owed each other. He'd bring up favors I never asked for, debts that only existed in his version of events. Between them came the calls, silent at first, then heavy with breathing, then his voice low and deliberate. "You're making a mistake you can't undo, Captain." Claire's tone was softer, but no less cutting. She sent old photos. 2 girls at Fort Bragg in mismatched fatigues, grinning like the world couldn't touch us. Captioned, "Guess we're not teammates anymore." Another was from my officer commissioning ceremony. Her arm linked through mine with the line, "I was there for you. You can't do this for me." I'd stare at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, but never sent the words I wanted, about choice, boundaries, and the difference between love and leverage. A week later, Mason went too far. I was on shift at the base medical facility, finishing a post-op chart, when raised voices echoed in the hall. 2 MPs had him cornered near the check-in desk. He was waving that same brochure like it was proof of my betrayal. "She's family. She can't hide behind a uniform to ignore that." I didn't confront him, just called the duty officer and let procedure take over. Still, the stares from my colleagues lingered for days. Then came the truck. A black pickup, like Mason's, started showing up half a block from my apartment. Some nights it idled with the lights off. Other times it sat cold, unmoving, like a marker left in place. Coming home from late shifts, I'd feel that familiar prickle between my shoulder blades, the one you learn to trust in a war zone. I began keeping records. Screenshots, call logs, photos of the truck with timestamps. I handed printed copies to Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, our base security NCO. He didn't blink. "We'll keep eyes out. And Captain, don't be alone if you don't have to." Solid advice. But even with the army watching my 6, I could feel the noose tightening. Mason wasn't going to vanish. He was waiting for the moment I'd break. Just after 9 p.m., my phone lit up with Claire's name. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. Her voice was off, too calm, like she was reading from a script. "Mason's upset. He wants to talk to you." No explanation, no apology. Before I could reply, she hung up. 15 minutes later, the pounding began, not a knock, but a flat-palmed assault that made the hinges strain. Mason's voice roared through the door, thick with rage. "Open the damn door, Emily." I backed into the kitchen, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the MP's number. But I hesitated, thinking if I called now, there'd be no going back with Claire. That pause cost me everything. The frame splintered under his shoulder, the door swinging wide. He was on me before I could step away, the sharp scent of whiskey on his breath. The first blow was an open-handed shove that snapped my head to the side. Then a fist to my cheek, another to my shoulder, driving me so hard into the wall that a picture frame rattled to the floor. Pain burst white across my vision. And there stood Claire, framed in the doorway, arms crossed, hip cocked, like this was nothing more than an inconvenience in her night. Her voice was cool, almost bored. You should have signed the papers. I wanted to ask her how we had ended up here. From braiding each other's hair in the back of Dad's Jeep, to standing by while I bled in my own living room. But Mason wasn't done. With one swipe of his arm, my laptop hit the floor, the crash ringing in my ears. He leaned in close, so near I could see the red threads in his eyes. Next time, he hissed, you'll think twice. Then he left, Claire right behind him. The door frame splintered, the air heavy with sweat and shattered wood. I pressed my palm to my cheek and felt the swelling already forming. It took nearly 10 minutes to reach the gate at the edge of the base, each step sending pain shooting through my shoulder. The MPs didn't ask a thing, they didn't have to. I was in uniform, bleeding, and I had a name to give. For once, it wasn't mine they'd be writing down. They drove me straight to the base hospital. Bright fluorescent lights, the sting of antiseptic, a nurse's cool hands against my face. X-rays showed a fractured cheekbone and deep bruising across my shoulder. I'd seen worse on deployment, but those injuries had never come from my own family. By morning, C had taken control. Special Agent Harris introduced himself in a voice stripped of anything unnecessary. This is both a federal assault case and a possible military jurisdiction matter. He said, notepad open. His questions were sharp, exact, and I answered with the same clipped precision I used in field reports. Still, it was how he listened, as though every pause meant something, that told me he'd done this for years. 2 days later, Claire called. No apology, no mention of the bruises she'd seen with her own eyes. Just, Emily dropped the charges. You're making things harder for the family. People talk. Dad doesn't need the shame. I didn't shout, but I didn't bend either. I'm not the one who brought shame into this family. With my JAG attorney, Captain Reeves, we built the case piece by piece. Hallway security footage of Mason breaking in, threatening texts, and the real jewel, a police report Harris dug up from Oklahoma, where Mason had been accused of assaulting a former girlfriend. Those charges had vanished back then. Not this time. The case split in two: federal court for the assault, and a military review board for conduct on federal property. Mason showed up in a crisp suit, hair trimmed, medals pinned to his lapel. He played his part well. Soft-spoken, eyes lowered. The picture of a decorated veteran who'd lost his temper. I'd prepared for the worst. That Claire would hold her line, keep his record spotless in front of the jury. But on the third day, everything shifted. She took the stand, her voice shaking at first, then gaining strength. She told them about the pounding on my door. The moment it gave way, the first hit Mason threw. Each word stole the air from the room. When she was done, the jury no longer saw me as a sister stirring a feud, but as someone who had survived exactly what I'd claimed. And Mason, for the first time, stopped smiling. The sentence came on a rainy Thursday. 6 years in federal prison, plus a lifetime restraining order. The judge's tone was steady, final, like a gavel against stone. I didn't smile. I didn't have to. The weight I'd been carrying wasn't gone, but it had shifted enough for me to stand straighter. Physical healing was measured in X-rays and range of motion charts. The rest, the sleepless nights, the jolt of panic at sudden sounds, took longer. The Army gave me a counselor for combat trauma, but it was the Warrior Sisters group that truly saw me. Women in uniform with their own stories of betrayal behind closed doors. We didn't need to explain. We already understood. Claire's divorce filing came without drama. One morning she left a voicemail. I'm out. Weeks later, she asked to meet for coffee. The talk was slow, careful, full of unspoken traps. But it was a start. She was in therapy, learning to untangle what Mason had tied around her for years. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I could see the sister I once knew trying to surface. I requested a transfer from my old quarters to a training role, teaching combat medics how to stay steady in chaos. The classroom was cleaner than the field, but my scenarios stayed raw and real. I told them boundaries weren't just part of patient care. They were survival, whether in a war zone or your own living room. Some nights I'd walk the perimeter after class, the Texas wind carrying dust and diesel. I'd think about the invisible lines we draw and how quickly they vanish. When we're taught that family excuse is everything, the army taught me discipline. Mason taught me the price of letting others define my loyalty. Somewhere in between, I learned that my safety was not up for negotiation. Not for blood, not for history, not for anyone. The first time I stood at a podium afterward, the room was filled with uniforms, some sharp and decorated, others faded from years of wear. It was a conference on domestic violence and financial exploitation in the military. My name was printed under the words guest speaker. I told my story without softening the edges, not to dramatize, but because the truth didn't need dressing up. I spoke about how loyalty can be turned into a weapon, how family ties can be chains if you're not careful. Heads nodded. Some eyes dropped. They understood. A month later, a letter arrived from a federal prison. Mason's handwriting, sharp, controlled. He said he was sorry. That prison had given him perspective. I read it twice, then set it aside. His words didn't sting, and they didn't heal. My recovery had never depended on his remorse. The next year, Claire came to that same conference. She sat in the back, hands folded, listening. Afterward, we barely spoke. Just a hug, brief but steady. Sometimes reconciliation isn't loud. It's simply the absence of harm. If I've learned one thing from all this, it's that blood doesn't guarantee safety, and history doesn't equal obligation. In the military, we drill for every threat outside the wire, but no one teaches you how to shield yourself from someone who knows your childhood nickname, who sat next to you at dinner, who calls you family. So I tell them now, draw your boundaries in ink, not pencil. Find your allies. In your unit, your base, the law. Don't let love, or the memory of it, convince you to risk your safety or your future. We train to defend a nation, but sometimes the most important battle is defending yourself from the people you never thought you'd have to fight. And when you win that battle, not with rage, but with resolve, you carry a kind of honor no one can take from you. If this story reached you, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? Share your location, share your feelings. I read them all. Your voice matters here. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe and be part of our growing community.